You are listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, social, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. Visit exopolitics.org and sign up to receive our email notifications, news, and information. Be informed and be aware with Exopolitics Today. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Well, it's my great pleasure to welcome Tony Rodrigues and Elena Danaan to Exopolitics Today, and we're going to be covering some really fascinating information that is relevant to an update that Elena recently got about Ceres. And Ceres was a planetoid that I first got to learn about through an interview with Tony Rodrigues back in 2016, I think it was, and it was at Mount Shasta, and we did a 5-part interview, and he talked about his time on Ceres. That was the base for a Dark Fleet merchant ship that he served on for a total of 13 years. And he got to spend a lot of time at Ceres between missions and knows intimately about Ceres. And I think he's really in a good position to be able to comment about Elena's update about Ceres that she just received from the Galactic Federation. So welcome to both Tony and Elena.
Hello.
Hello.
Happy to be
Thank
here.
you, Michael.
Yes. Well, I want to first begin, Tony, by just saying that back in 2016, one of the things that you told me was at the time, what was major news was the Dawn spacecraft that was making a rendezvous with Ceres. And it took photographs, and there was this mysterious white spot that was like big news for at the time, and people speculated on that white spot. But you said something about the white spot, that actually it being a geyser. And it actually turned out that years later, NASA confirmed that. So, well, why don't you just start by telling us a little bit about your how you got to see this geyser on Ceres as while you were serving for the Dark Fleet merchant vessel?
At the time, I was a cargo engineer, and I was working on a craft that was basically doing cargo trade missions on interstellar flights. It was a very carrot and stick system, so that if you did your work really good, you got rewarded. And if you were lax in your duties, you would get penalized. So we worked very hard. There was a time that we flew, I believe it's Ganymede that has all the geysers. And months prior to that, there was an eruption of geysers. And we were given time to leave our posts and go look out the window and observe the geysers as we flew over Ganymede. And I did not, because I wanted to work and get extra credit. And what happened was, as a result, for months later, everybody on the ship talked about how beautiful the geysers were. And I regretted not doing that. So the Ceres geyser, I was told, goes off in random fashion between 6 and 9 year intervals. So every 6 years possibly, or it could take 9 years. It was either 6 to 9 years of that time period, it will go off again. And it went off, and it was only like 3 days or something that it would give water. And so we were given we made a pass over the Okator crater, and we were given time away from our post. And this time I made sure, because I had regretted it in the past. And I went to the C deck, the mid deck of the ship, and there was an observation window. It was very crowded. And I stood next to one of the smaller windows next to an officer. And as we flew over, we could see the white deposits. They're deep too. That's the other thing, is they're a meter deep of the salt. And I asked him, I said, it seems to me we could use those. That's a resource, we could use that. And the geyser shot up about 10 kilometers into the, off the surface, and then the water evaporated, and the salt and the deposits would snow back down in a cone around it at different speeds. It was absolutely beautiful. I've had artist renditions of it, but none of them do it really justice. They're always, the Okator crater is a big place. It's 55 miles wide or something. But it was beautiful, and that was one of the memories that stayed with me the whole time, even after I had been erased. Like in my teen years, I remembered that, looking at it, and I remembered that conversation I had with the officer. But at the time I said, it seems like we could use those chemicals down there, that's a resource. And he's turned to me and he said, the only thing you could go down there and scoop it up, and you could use it and take a nice bath. That it was salt with a slight amount of magnesium in it, that there was magnesium, but it was basically just salt. And at the time that you and I were in communication, NASA was distant. The Dawn probe was still far away. It wasn't close up, and it was getting pictures that were still pixelated. But and then in the months to come, when it got when the Dawn probe got into orbit, it did a prior scan, and they didn't know what they thought. It was a soup of chemicals that they were assuming, and it wasn't until August of last year that they confirmed that it was salt, in the article that I sent you. So
Yes,
that was very very valid. Any little thing, when you come out with information such as this, that's fantastic to the average person, every little stitch that can help validate you is just, it was a very moving moment for me when that article came out. I was moved.
Yeah, that was very important, that article from scientists studying new photos from the Dawn spacecraft. Apparently it had done another flyby, and they were able to confirm that these were salt deposits from some sort of brine that was coming out from the interior of Ceres. And that was one of the other things I remember you telling me, that Ceres had this huge below surface ocean that was something that the base there was reliant on for its water supply. So yeah, it was kind of multiple confirmations really of key aspects of your testimony that I thought was really important.
They actually, there were mining operations that was the entire goal. They were not mining out the material to use. They were searching for water, deposits of water. And the urban legend among us, so I was not in the know when I was there. I was basically slave labor, so I wasn't in the know. But the urban legend among us was that they were finding technology. When they found pockets of water and emptied it out, that they were finding technology, ancient technology, and that actually the caverns that they found there, the hangar bay system they had found that was existing, that some other race had built millennia before and abandoned. And they had moved in and began to convert it. So we didn't know, so it was speculation at my level of society. But the urban legend was that they were looking for pockets of water because they had found advanced technology in pockets of water there. But there was no official speaking of it, from the people that were in charge of us. The miners just went in directions that they were told. They had no idea where they were going.
So definitely there was a lot going on, Ceres, seeking water, ancient technology, and of course there was a very large base that you were stationed at for roughly 13 years, and you got to learn a lot about its kind of social structure, leadership, and how it was all run. So that takes us to Elena's update on Ceres that she got from Thor Han. And Elena sent me a message on August 21st, so a week ago from today. And Elena, I mean, do you have that message handy to read out?
Yes.
Or if you can read it out for us, and then we can get you to elaborate.
Sure. So on August 21st, I had this message from Thor Han, our telepathic message device I have implanted. So here is what he said, and it was really with an official feel energy. The fate of Ceres colony has been debated with great attention until lately, coming together with a common decision with the Zene Council and the Earth Alliance. It was decided that in reason of a large civilian colony settled for a period of time long enough to officially name them as planetary residents, Ceres will not be evacuated. Instead, we will force the Nachtwaffen military personnel to leave by means of agreements in the first place, or if force if necessary. We firmly believe that Ceres needs to officially become a free world, and it will eventually. I had another update this morning. I didn't tell you yet, Michael. It's just a bit an advancement on this. I'm getting quickly to my notes. Here we go. So just like that. So Thor Han showed me a visualization from a ship in orbit of Ceres. So he said the operations are the liberation of Ceres have started. They are highly sensitive because this planetoid is much populated. No time or opportunity there regarding to how things are set on Ceres to infiltrate and apply the usual tactics of training and empowering the locals. The Alliance, well, the Earth Alliance, attacked the armed force of the Nachtwaffen directly in a precise and tactical punch operation. The reason why it took that long for the Galactic Federation to intervene on Ceres is precisely because it's a tiny place, dense with civilian population. And Thor Han told me that the civilians were very happy to cooperate with the Alliance. It's very messy and chaotic at the moment, but the Alliance is in control. The Nachtwaffen officers have chosen to fight to death, but most of the personnel are being evacuated safely with the help of the Alliance. So that's what I got. Now, I mean, Tony, is that making sense to you, or?
Well, you know, before we kind of like get Tony to chime in on that, it'd be good to know.
Yeah.
You know, the Earth Alliance that is working with the Galactic Federation and forcing the Nachtwaffen or the Dark Fleet to abandon Ceres. You know, just explain who makes up the Earth Alliance.
The Earth Alliance is a joint force, military force of the Galactic Federation of Worlds, humanoid soldiers, and Earth. I know the US Navy is involved, and other countries are also recently have been involved in the Earth Alliance. It is the Earth Alliance, this cooperation of military, extraterrestrial and human, who are working in the undergrounds, clearing the dumps, and who have worked on the moon, clearing the moon. So it's a joint structure, and the Solar Warden is part of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think clearly the Navy's Solar Warden program would be part of that. Now, I imagine the Russian secret space program would also be involved with that kind of liberation. Now, would the Chinese space program be involved? I mean, that's another question. Do you think they're involved with this Earth Alliance?
It is possible because it started with the US Navy, and during the last 4 years, I've heard, other countries joined. So it is an international Earth Alliance.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Good. All right. Well, now in your message, well, the second one especially, you focused on the civilian population. It's got a very large civilian population. The Nachtwaffen is being forced out, and now there's a big civilian population which is regarded by the Earth Alliance and the Galactic Federation as indigenous, even though I assume that these are kind of recent transplants from Earth via the Dark Fleet to Ceres. That, you know, prior to, say, the 1950s, Ceres was just an abandoned planetoid, but you know, since that time, the Dark Fleet established a presence there. So, you know, how big is the population there in Ceres? I guess either one of you can comment.
At the time, I was told the number that I was told was 225,000, and I say that with I know that it was always growing. They were building out rapidly, and the mode of construction I was not aware, I didn't see take place. I saw places that were under construction, but there were places that were city blocks that were completely remodeled in a matter of weeks, completely tore down and rebuilt. So the speed of building was very rapid, and space was at a premium, so much so that many of our missions where we had cargo, they had like an asteroid, an icy asteroid that was out in the Kuiper belt somewhere, that was a warehouse facility, because space was at such a premium on Ceres, because it was building out so quickly. The number 220,000 may be just only the slave population, for all I know. I know that the barracks area where I was had about 40,000 people, of the area, and that just the military hangar bay that I was aware of was something like 15 miles big, where they could fly ships in, and that was all military. So there were no civilian population there, and it was a big area, and that was where the ships would come in, and they had stalls for all different sizes of ships, and it was miles. The layout of the train routes, everything was connected by train inside, were pockets of small towns that were always being built out at the time. So I remember basically 2 rings and then outer rings of the train routes, and it went basically all the way around the inside of the planet. And some of them were giant caverns that you would come out, and there would be good size caverns, that some of them were artificial, that went into natural looking caverns, and that you wouldn't even see you couldn't even see the top of them. It was black, and they were big areas. They had there was one area that they were proud of that was a replica of a European town. I struggle with it. I want to say it's Copenhagen, but it's one of those that was important to them, to the Deutsch culture. They don't identify as Germans as much as many of them identified as Deutsch, if I'm saying that right, the Deutsch culture, because their history the history that they were proud of was based around the 30 Years' War. I know we're talking about population. I'm getting off point here, but I'm just trying to kind of fill in what I remember of the society that was there. I rarely went into civilian areas if I could help it, because I wore a slave collar and I had a military uniform. So there was a certain amount of embarrassment wearing a collar. So I would avoid places that felt that I would be picked on, and I stayed in outer areas, kind of less populated areas. But I know that the colony was growing and they had big plans. And
so that estimate of 250,000, that might have only been for part of Ceres, and there were other parts that were being built out, and it was growing all the time. And of course, the period you spent there, if I remember correctly, it was roughly from around 1997 to around 2010. Is that about right?
No, it was before that. It was actually from probably 88 to 2000.
Okay.
In there. So we're talking, that was over 20 years ago. So the rate of growth, I mean, I don't have a number on that. I don't have something that could give you that, but it was fantastic. The rate of construction was absolutely fantastic. They were building entire train routes in months. They were adding routes onto the train line, and it was constantly updating. So it was under rapid construction during that time, in the 90s, in the end of the 90s.
Okay. So all the structures in Ceres that you saw, I mean, these were recent constructions. We're not talking about the Dark Fleet going in there, finding an abandoned underground bases and heavens that were
they had found ancient building, a cavern that was a vertical cavern that was very far. The lift was 40 minutes of lift time. There were big lifts. And they were rooms. They had giant stone doors. I have artist representation of that. They had giant stone doors that they converted into apartments, and they made apartments. And when you got there, you could telepathically say, "I'm here," and the person inside wouldn't hear you, but the door would tell them, and they could make you go away. So much so that the door could cause a headache. They could cause you to feel pain if they wanted you to go away. And they had found that system existing, and went in and converted it to human quarters for ship crew, people that were in the command level or the engineering level of the ship. Not my level. I was in a barracks, but that was an area that they had found. And then there were places in much of the hangar bay, there were the crinkled ceilings, like you see in big gymnasiums, the metal press ceilings, and they had the beams were on the outside, and you could see the seams of it. People said that the beams were on the outside because it was holding air, and they had rust. There were a lot of buildings that had rust, and there were there were places that you went, especially at the end of the hangar bay, that were looked like 1940s or 1950s construction with marble steps and that kind of architecture. And then the newer places were much more modern and had small streets. They only had small electric vehicles that went up the street. You were not allowed to walk in the center of the street, only emergency vehicles. And they were smaller long caverns that were man-made, they had businesses and living quarters there too. Those were civilian places. Mm-hmm. And they usually had a painted sky. And towards the end of the 90s, they were beginning to put in like a video sky that had a moving sky, the light, and then they had an hour. It was also, I believe, on a 20-hour day, not a 24-hour day, the way that the clocks worked. They had a 20-hour day arranged.
Right. Elena, so you, in the message you got from Thor Han, he said that Ceres needs to officially become a free world, and it will eventually. So, exactly what does he mean from that? I mean, well, I guess a lot of people would assume, well, wouldn't humanity, wouldn't the Earth have responsibility for Ceres if the Dark Fleet was to abandon it? But does the Galactic Federation have another set of principles for a population like that on Ceres?
Well, the Galactic Federation considers that when there is a solar system like ours with a leading civilization like ours on Earth, they have rights of possession any planet who doesn't have life on it. So, for instance, any planetoid without life, it's under their responsibility. So Ceres has a human colony. There's lots of civilians. So these are people from Earth. So it's under the jurisdiction of Earth. But as they are considered, these people, as it should be, these people are considered, as he said, they've been there so long that they have been there long enough to be considered Ceresian, I don't know, Ceres locals. So the planetoid belongs to them. And so being free as a free world means being liberated from extraterrestrial occupant, from anything that is not from Earth. And that is liberation from Greys, because apparently Greys have a hold on Ceres as well. But and getting rid of the tyranny of the Nachtwaffen, because they work with the Greys and the Sicars and the Reptilians, and they are not considered really on the side of the Earth civilization, so they are considered on the side of the enemy of Earth. So once they are not under the tyranny of the Dark Fleet, they become autonomous and can really take possession of their planet and do whatever they want with it. It's theirs. So it's just getting them liberated from this tyrannical regime, which is involved with extraterrestrials. So I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Yes, it does. And it's a very important point because, and we will get to Mars, but it does seem that Ceres is likely the first place in our solar system where this free world is going to be populated by humans descended from Earth, but where the Earth itself doesn't have any direct jurisdiction, that they are kind of like on their own.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting. So Tony, I know you would know a lot about this, the structure of the civilian leadership or how that would be set up. So, well, what do you think is going on with Ceres now that it's been liberated, or that the military, the Nachtwaffen has been cleared out, and the Greys and the Dracos are gone?
So there were a couple of other species of ET that I still have trouble with names. I'm very impressed with Elena, the amount of information she has with names of ET races. But there were two other indigenous ones, not indigenous, but that they came from there, but that basically they had a fairly large population there as well. But the civilian government was completely ran by the military. The military had total control over the civilian population there. And when times that I rode on the train, I was not supposed to, by policy, by what I was not supposed to interact with people, but you still can't help but overhear on the train rides. And the people in generally the civilians that I listened to were not happy with their life. They had an air of fear of them. They were very careful not to speak. When the two of them would get talking, there were things that they were afraid to speak about, and everybody was aware that they were being watched. And so the general feeling I did not witness very happy citizenry very often. There were the crew on the ship that I worked on that were indigenous Deutsch crew or Germans that were there were also very, very happy with their situation. So they had a great amount of authority, even if they weren't very high up in the military structure, in the civilian. And they had prearranged marriages. They were doing like you could opt in and out of a program. But I remember that one time there was an officer that had his choice of 2 or 3 different women, and he finally did settle down and get a wife. And from the conversations that I heard around that, it was a very old-fashioned, like she was very not, very old-fashioned, where the women didn't have a lot of rights, and he had basically complete authority over her. And that was basically the family structure. So that it did come up, like he didn't care if she was happy or not with the arrangement, that it was his choice. And so their societal structure was still very backward compared to what we think is, as far as women's rights and the civilian rights. They were totally in a backseat to any military personnel, had far more authority than any civilian did. So if that's something that's changed, I mean, that's going to be a titanic change there. And I think that the civilians, I mean, they've also, I was aware that the children, I don't know exactly verbatim what it was, but I was aware that they had learned a completely different history of the earth than what we have. So when they went to school, they learned a completely different history and a completely different set of, ethics and everything across the board. So I would expect a liberated Ceres society to still be kind of, I don't know about backwards, but still be kind of inhumane by many standards that we think. That's what I would expect. Like a kind of a down the road version of what the Nazis began in the 30s, late 30s and 40s.
Mm-hmm. So very patriarchal, very traditional, and so the local civilian government that presumably would take over, like people like mayors or town councils, the equivalent. Now that the Dark Fleet has been cleared out, those mayors or town councils would be in charge of the local authority, and they would have to come up with some overarching political system, like a Lord Mayor or a Prime Minister, now that they are running everything themselves. So that's very interesting. So, Elena, does the Galactic Federation have expectations on the kind of nature of the political system for a newly liberated area like this? Like, would the Galactic Federation tell the newly liberated, say, Germanic cities and mayors and town councils there, to like, we expect you to respect human rights, we expect you to kind of like believing equality for women and that sort of thing?
That's difficult to say because I don't know how far they can be involved in this, because their ethic is to not to interfere in the development of a species. Just, well, when it's needed, they do it. But then there is so far maybe they want to go. I think they will give them some guidance, but they will let them organize themselves. Take care that they don't kill each other, of course, but they will let them organize, because it's not getting out of a tyranny to go into a new system where you will have other people who will come and tell them what to do. That's not the point. It's to set them free, and they're on their own. Well, they're looked after from far, but they are on their own, and they need to regain confidence and sovereignty, so they need to do it themselves. That's what I believe, watching how the Galactic Federation behaves. And something that what you were saying, Michael and Tony, about you both, about a community that is at a different speed than the Earth regarding to, well, for instance, women's rights and things like that. Maybe that's why I think it's a unique culture that grew to its own, and maybe because they are locals now, they're considered as a whole culture on its own, unique. Maybe they need to have their sovereignty and not being too much interfered with. That's why they won't be under the jurisdiction of Earth, which is like so more evolved in human rights and stuff like that. So that would be my take on it.
Yeah, very interesting question is, would Ceres be economically self-sufficient now if the Dark Fleet is removed from the picture? And the Dark Fleet had outposts on the Earth. I mean, we're talking places like Antarctica, Mars, and the Dark Fleet would have been able to move a lot of resources and people between those places. But now if the Dark Fleet is cut out, that would mean that, well, on the one hand, Ceres would have to be economically self-sufficient. Maybe this kind of merchant space marine that Tony was a part of, maybe they would bring in supplies. But I imagine at some point they would have to reach agreements with the Earth governments for things like resources or having people move in, or whatever needs that they have. That it would be very difficult for a small place of, maybe it's 500,000 now, just estimate, to be able to kind of go on its own if the Dark Fleet is cut out. But maybe the merchant marine would bring in enough. I mean, Tony, you served on that for 13 years. Is the trade, are the resources they bring in enough for a place like Ceres as a free world to survive for decades to come?
We took a great deal of cargo from the Earth to Ceres. There were times when we took excess military surplus, boots, clothing, things like that. We would take there. We would take whatever was extra and go there. There were supplies that they still relied on. We needed cargo to go there. They were not self-sufficient at the time that I was there. Also, because I sat in on mission briefings on the ship, the citizenry had no idea of the situation of the supply lines. But because I sat in on mission briefings, they were very aware that we were locked out of trading with other outposts in the solar system because they were slavers, because they had slavery, and because of their political system. They basically, we were not allowed to go to Saturn. We were not allowed to go to Venus. There is a species on Pluto. We were not allowed to go there. We did flybys, and they would kind of announce it over, we're flying by Pluto, but we were not allowed to go there. And what I mean that, I mean the Ceres colony was not allowed to trade or interact with those races in any way. So their political system, because they were subservient to a base, they took their orders from a base around Jupiter that was a Draco base that was inside a temporal bubble. And that's basically where the hierarchy came from. And from Antarctica. There were times they went to Antarctica. We referred to it as high command. I don't think Antarctica dictated Ceres colony policy. I think that they were subservient to them on the structure, but it was the policy changes on Ceres colony came from Jupiter, came from that base around Jupiter. And because of that, they were locked out of doing business with many colonies, other colonies inside the solar system, and with, I guess, I guess back then, what you would say are branches of the alliance, the current alliance. They did not do business with them. And even on the moon, there was still kind of an uneasy thing, uneasy relationship when Ceres colony personnel went to the moon, to bases on the moon and did business there. It was kind of like they had a pass. It was a temporary thing. There was not, it was an uneasy relationship. So I could see things like that changing, because if the military's out of there and they tapered back on the slavery, maybe new doors would open for them. But we were well aware at the time that they were not self-sufficient. Even with the technology of replication and with the water that they had, there were things, the energy was an issue. The free energy systems that they had acquired from other ET species, and it was about power output. So it's easy to get a box that gives you 1,000, I'm throwing out arbitrary numbers, 1,000 watts of power, but they needed petawatts of power. So to run the artificial gravity plating throughout the entire Ceres colony. So, and these were hard to come by, that they had business deals with other races that gave them exotic generators that had high output. So that was power limitation was the name of the game for them for us at the time. Power limitation on the ships and on the colony generators. So that was one of the issues for them, was overall power output and just other human supplies. Also, real food was a premium. Real food was, the economy was driven by real food over replicated food.
Okay, so we know now that Ceres traditionally has been very reliant on Earth for trade, and so now that the Dark Fleet is out of the picture, that there would have to be some kind of negotiation or agreement reached with Earth authorities. But there is a framework now for that, which is the Artemis Accords. The Artemis Accords are a set of bilateral agreements between the US and other nations. That I believe at the moment there's 13 nations officially that are part of the Artemis Accords, and the Artemis Accords sets up things like safety zones and protects the operations of national space programs in these safety zones. So it would be very easy for, say, Ceres as a free world to become a signatory to the Artemis Accords, which would mean that they would get protection for their space program. It would be considered a safety zone, and they could do trade, they could do all sorts of things with the national space programs of other countries. So yeah, and maybe this is part of the rationale for the Artemis Accords, that it allows places like Ceres, which has this very unusual status, to kind of like join with the rest of the Earth's nations, and it benefits Ceres as well, because the Artemis Accords recognizes national sovereignty. And so Ceres would be left to run its own affairs, but still it would be working with Earth's major nations in terms of our solar operations in our solar system, and it would get protection as well.
Yeah, it makes sense.
That Ceres, I would say, was also like a very prime piece of real estate, because it's on the edge of the asteroid belt. The Ceres Colony Corporation was not the primary mining operation from the asteroid belt. Basically, there was another operation out there. I don't know if it was on Vesta or a different area, but there was another corporation that basically handled the asteroid belt mining. Ceres was the place that they would bring their ships for service. Things would come in there. I thought for most of my career that there was only one hangar bay. It wasn't until my last 2 or 3 years that I was made aware that there were several hangar bays around the planet that were used. But the main hangar bay, the biggest one, was the military one. So there were 5 or 6 other military ones that I became aware of, and there were civilian hangar bays. And but the Ceres Colony Corp did not deal with mining in the asteroid belt. But because of its proximity and because of the fact that it has water and space available there, it was a very important place. No matter what comes of my testimony, or no matter what comes of how a disclosure looks in the future, there's going to be people on Ceres. It's just a valuable place. And so my testimony may not come into play until long after I'm gone, when when it comes into the mainstream, when actually mining the asteroid belt is a major driving force in the Earth's economy, then you're going to see Ceres. Everybody's going to see Ceres colony, and my testimony may be more valuable at that time. So I may be after I'm gone. It may be soon, I hope.
Well, you raised a very interesting point here, which is you mentioned Ceres Colony Corporation. So that takes us to the question of, well, what role do the different corporations play in managing and running a place like Ceres? Now, the Dark Fleet is gone. Does that mean the Ceres corporation takes over, comes into the leadership position, or is there a vacuum there? I mean, does that Ceres Colony Corporation, was that also disbanded? I mean, maybe Elena, because I know Elena, in talking about the Jupiter agreements, you emphasized the point that the Galactic Federation not only was getting Earth's national space programs to kind of reach agreement on managing our solar system, but also corporations were involved. So does that mean that a company like the Ceres Colony Corporation, that they have a role to play in managing Ceres and in the solar system?
Well, they could because the corporations who were invited, were selected to participate to the Jupiter agreements, were willing to cooperate in programs for the whole solar system. The whole solar system was involved. It was about choosing safety zones for the solar system, but not only, to know how will the trade and all the corporation, the commerce, or everything work for the star system, with all the different planets, all the different mining projects and everything. So it was to organize a whole system. So of course Ceres is in it. I don't know really precisely, but of course Ceres will be in it, I suppose. Yeah.
How about you, Tony? The Ceres Colony Corporation, do you think they are more than capable of just taking over if the Dark Fleet has been forced out?
Well, I think that the Dark Fleet is the military presence that was, and they were very well entrenched and in charge of everything on Ceres Colony. It was considered Ceres Colony Corporation, and I think that if the military aspect of it has been removed, then it will continue as a corporation. That they would probably, the leadership. So a history thing that I remember was in my very early years there, like my first or second year there, the person that was in charge, the military leader was in charge, was assassinated. And it became, so I didn't have access. It's not like I had my own TV set or my own phone that I had access to information. It was what I heard, but everybody talked about that for years to come. That was like it was on the scale of a 9/11 event for us. It was on that scale of news, and the person in charge was assassinated, and there were conspiracy theories around that when he took over. So, and that was all a completely military. So there was a lot of volleying for power. There was a lot of dirty things going on in the military structure of the government then that I see. Once that's gone, I think the civilian population will probably still stay in a corporate just because I believe that's how they interact. All the colonies are interacting with each other on a corporate level. Mm-hmm. I think they have a set of laws, and it's going to it would make sense to just keep it as a corporation, so that they have a protocol for interacting with other corporations, the Mars Corp colony, for instance, or there's so many of them now. Mm-hmm. That okay, so would keep that structure.
So when we consider Ceres becoming a free planet, it actually would be a planet that is run by a corporation, the Ceres Colony Corporation, which would be interesting, because this is probably the wave of the future, that many of these outposts, whether we're talking the asteroid belt, whether we're talking about the moons of Jupiter or Saturn or beyond, that eventually it'll be corporations that establish a presence there, and that it'll be the corporations that have like the sovereignty and are in charge, kind of similar to the Americas in the 1600s, when the British Crown would give a charter to different corporations to establish colonies in the Americas. So, that sort of thing is probably what's going to be happening in our solar system now, with this new setup, that different nations will be just having corporations go out there. And we're seeing that now with, Elon Musk's SpaceX and Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos and so forth, that they have the resources, the deep pockets to be able to fund and build space colonies all out there. So I just wanted to move on to Mars. And Elena's had a lot to say about Mars in terms of the liberation. But before I get Elena to elaborate on the liberation of Mars, I wanted to just get Tony to talk about your experiences on Mars, where you were for a short time you're part of a program where you were fighting against some of the indigenous species, and you talked about fighting against insectoids. So can you talk about that program?
It was a experimental program. They were trying to get numbers. So they had soldiers that were well equipped and very well trained, but they just couldn't get match the numbers that they had. And I was part of a program that they were experimenting with on very minimally trained, minimally equipped slave labor. To put it bluntly, we were trained on the moon, and basically mind programmed to just not have a fight or flight response or a flight response. So in the face of danger, we were programmed to fight only, and not. That was basically the training. But we went out and did a few active missions, and what they found was that the insectoids, to the strategies that they employed with us, we were basically like a distraction on the battlefield, like a bounding maneuver. We were the bait on a bounding maneuver on the battlefield, and it worked well at first, but they concluded that the insects adapted to the strategy much faster than they were anticipated to, and they canceled the program. So at that point, I was retrained. I was moved from a forward base, from an abandoned forward base that had been overrun at one point by the insects. I was transferred from that to a city, and then they gave me an assessment, an aptitude assessment, and then I was in ship maintenance after they trained me, and then shipped me off to Ceres colony, where I spent the remainder of my time in space.
Did you, during your time on Mars, encounter the indigenous reptilians there, or were you told about them?
No, we were told about them. I heard talk about them, but I think in one briefing I saw a few pictures, quick pictures of them, but I did not come in contact with any reptilians during the entire time I was there.
Okay, but at the very least, you know that there's an indigenous insectoid species which is highly intelligent, which has been fighting against the Dark Fleet and the corporate presence on Mars, and that there are reptilians there as well. And you mentioned being taken to a city, and that was Aries Prime. So just, what is Aries Prime?
Well, it was a huge network of underground structures. And so when I came from the hangar bay into what looks just like an airport, was a big dome that was underground. And the dome itself was made out of clear material. You could see the earth on the other side of it, the dirt. And it was underground, and the very top of the dome, you could see blue sky. And dust swirling around. So the dome was built just under the surface of the sand, and then that connected, and it was very modern looking structure, a very modern looking concrete work. It was flowing. A lot of the walls were flowing and curved. It was very aesthetically pleasing. And during my time there, I had my own, like an apartment. I had my own bathroom with a sink. For me, it was luxurious from what I had been through previously.
Well, now I just ask Elena to tell us about your latest information about the liberation of Mars.
So yeah, I go directly to read the intel I had on August 26th, just recently. So the intel from Thor Han was, first he gave me this message: Mars is free, Deimos is being evacuated. And then later in the day, he said, at second contact, the situation on Mars is chaotic at the moment, as the local Martian resistance is rushing to take hold of the underground facilities that have been evacuated. All human personnel was safely sent back to Terra and will be replaced. There is now a situation where the Martians need to comply to the recent agreements reached between their leaders, the Galactic Federation of Worlds, and the new Terran corporations allowed to settle colonies and conduct their scientific and commercial operations. I trust this will go well, for this is a new era of prosperous and empowering cooperation for the Martians' benefit. They just need to calm down now in this euphoric celebration of their victory. So Thor Han told me that the local Martians who he had explained to me were three main categories of species. One human reptiloid ones, one insectoid, but the insectoid species has many variants, but they're all insectoid, and some creatures who are lower intelligence, but they are very strong. It's like they call them the burrowers. It's big worms. It's between a worm and the salamander. He said it's a big worm with small paws. Those are used to dig. So these, especially the insectoids and the reptilians, are obviously hyper excited, and they are very difficult to manage. And Thor Han that told me during the month and last year, they were training, the Federation was training the locals. They've done same as they did on Earth. They created an alliance, military alliance. In secret, they've given them technology and they've trained them to groom them, to prepare them to take back their own world. That's what happened. But these species, these Martians, are not as disciplined and compliant as us on Earth. We would. They are quite wild and independent. So now they just need to really watch that they follow the agreements that have been passed, to these sort of things.
So I'm just wondering, Tony, how you kind of feel about that personally. I mean, that knowing that that the bases that have been set up on Mars, whether by the Mars Colony Corporation, whether by the military, the Dark Fleet, that these bases, these facilities have been all overrun and taken over by the indigenous species, the insectoids, the reptilians, that you actually had at one point being involved in fighting against as part of this kind of like this Mars Colony Corporation and Dark Fleet agenda?
It would be, the vision that comes to mind is that you're talking about tens of thousands of people, million people displaced. So if that was happening on Earth, we would have a huge disaster. So if they moved out, Elena, if I heard you correctly, you said that they've been evacuated?
Yes.
The people
Yes,
have
they've
been
been evacuated and they'll be replaced. So I don't know where they.
So that's an incredibly huge undertaking, by any means, by any standard. So for that to happen is unprecedented for that kind. What I remember, it was a very populated place. It was far more the structures were much bigger than Ceres Colony in general. When you went, if you went to a restaurant on Ceres Colony, it was smaller than a restaurant on Mars Colony. It was, that's the easiest way I could put it. It was everything was made big there. So these were big places, and for them to be overrun and for that to just totally be abandoned is unprecedented. That's a I hope there wasn't a loss of life kind of thing.
Yeah, they probably have been displaced to maybe space stations or other places on Mars. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, that would be very interesting. Find out where
Yeah.
the residents of those bases have gone, how that evacuation, and how that went. Because Tony's correct that there would have been a significant population there, because this presence on Mars dates from the 1950s, and there were agreements during the Eisenhower administration, and the Apollo program was a cover to get enormous resources over to the Mars facilities. So yeah, we're talking about a significant population, and if all their bases were taken over and overrun by indigenous species, yeah, that would be kind of like for them it would have been a cataclysm. But of course,
I know.
from the perspective of the Galactic Federation, the Dark Fleet was this manipulated tool being used for an evil purpose, and everything that it had created needed to be dismantled. So yeah, we can understand why they did what they did.
I think if the insectoids and the local reptilians, especially the insectoids, are running in the place, they need to protect people the time all this chaos settles. So I think that would be maybe the reason why they evacuated them from the bases for the moment. I don't know.
Right. Any final comments on Mars, Tony, before I kind of like just wrap it up with Phobos and Deimos?
Sure. Well, the place that I was at originally had a very heavy American presence. So the program that I was in for Mars Colony Corp was under a wing of the American military. So I had gone in, and there were Greys there as well. Not the smaller Greys, but the taller ones. And they were in charge of my aptitude testing and my retraining. So, but there was a heavy American presence there. So for what I've heard of intelligence since then, I mean, obviously this was a long time. This was like 1988, 87, 88 when I would have been there. So it seems like much changed, and more of the Nachtwaffen moved in and had a much larger populace there from what I'm hearing. I'm only speculating on that. So I don't know how much of it would still be an American, a U.S. or an American presence. I don't know how much of it was lost there.
Well, I know Randy Kramer talked about the Mars Defense Force, and that sounded as though it was kind of like very heavy in terms of an American military presence that was there to protect Aries Prime from the indigenous insectoids and the reptilians. And so if the Galactic Federation has reached agreements with the Earth Alliance for the Dark Fleet and the corporation on Mars to leave, then I assume either the American presence there was also evacuated, or they maybe have set up some safety zones there. That would be a very interesting question. So I know, Tony, you have to go. So I just want to thank you for taking the time out to do this interview. I know you're there at Mount Shasta to do this conference. Is this conference just running the weekend? Does it go into the early week?
It's over the weekend. I had the pleasure of meeting Alex Collier yesterday, and Laura was there. Laura Eisenhower is there, and among many others. It's been a very good crowd, a very good vibe. There's a few hundred people in the audience, and there's a couple venues. And the forest fires are here. They have cleared out, so we're getting some nice days. But Mount Shasta is a magical place. It's been a wonderful conference, and I'll be, like I said, an hour. There's a secret space program panel that I'll be on, and then I'll be presenting basically my story from A to Z tomorrow, and then doing a Q&A. So what's happened is people, since I've gone public, you were my first interview, Dr. Salla, in 2016, and since I've gone public, it was never my intention to become a researcher, but people come to me and want me to, bounce ideas on me and validate. And what's happened is because of what I went through in recovering my memories and exercises that I did to myself, that's what I basically trade with people. That's what it's available on my website. I've made a website. I have a Patreon channel. But the real wonder is not anything that I've said or anything that I experienced that have panned out, but the sheer number of people that contact me. I can't I can't ever get my head around how many people have credit. And then and when I talk to them and have a back and forth, there's usually some very real things that you can glean that really substantiate what they say. You know, people believe different things, and most people have with fragmented memories may have a few things wrong, but there's always something there that leads them to believe that they've had contact. And I've categorized it in a few different ways, but the number of people that come to these conferences and the number of people that contact is staggering. So there's a huge amount of people that have had some kind of contact with something that erased their memory. So that's kind of what's happened to me, and I'm going to start gearing my conference talks around that phenomenon. That's kind of where I'm going after what I've been through. I think most people can access my story online. My website, TonyRodrigues.com. I'll plug that shamelessly.
Perfect. And do you think you will eventually get a book out there, or is it?
The book is finished. So I was unable to write the book physically because there are many times when there are people that have read some of the transcripts in my book and wanted to were made sick from it, because there are some very bad things, and it was very hard to relive as I was writing it. So somebody volunteered to help me, and I would send recordings, and it would get transcribed. The book is finished. It's being transcribed. I got another week to go, and I'll get the final transcription of it, and then we're editing it. And I'd like to be in touch with both of you. You guys are both great authors, and see where I'm going to go with how I'm going to make it available. But the main body of work, it's been over 4 years that I've been working on it, and it's been finished. I just finished it about Friday the 13th last month, right? Elena, I believe, finished her second book the same day, and
Yes,
so that was a neat synchronicity. Well, the book's done,
incredible.
and it was very painful to write. Writing it was a different emotional quality and than telling it, and I relived it, a lot of it. So it was a painful thing, but I think it's going to be very enlightening on a lot of things, and how basically my story, so what I went through. And like I said, I think it's important later in life, long after I'm gone. I think my account is going to be handy to somebody out there. It's history. You know, I'm a piece of history. I'm not an alive, ongoing thing that's going on, but what I witnessed a piece of history, and I think, you know, it's important to keep history.
Well, thank you, Tony, for your courage in coming forward and sharing all of that, and dealing with the challenges in presenting your information in a very skeptical world. So I think people are going to be very thankful for what you've done, and it took a lot of courage. So I'm very glad that your book is close to being finished, and I'm looking forward to having a look at it and getting the word out to people. So thank you, Tony.
Absolutely, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm honored to be here. I love both of your work. I'm a huge fan.
Thanks, Tony.
We're a huge fan of you too.
Okay. Well, Tony, I won't keep you if you need to run off. So
Yeah,
Elena,
I've got 12%
Yes.
battery power.
okay, all right. So you're pretty much Elena. I just wanted to kind of like give you the opportunity to share what's the latest updates with you in terms of your book. I think that is very close to being completed and coming out soon as well.
Yes, thank you, Michael. Yes, I'm writing a book which is a follow-up of the first one, A Gift from the Stars. This one will be about my encounters with Commander Val Thor and a few adventures I've lived since then, and of course the dates as they come. And it's I think the universe knows what it does when the proofreading is taking time to come back to me, and it gives me time to enter the new updates in it, so you will have all the story, and that's going to be out first week of September. It will be something to look forward, I suppose.
Fantastic. Well, I am looking forward to that and all the amazing updates that you've been sharing with me. I think people are very appreciative to learn about what's been happening in our solar system, and it seems that the next few years are going to be an incredible time of awakening, and both of you have played an important role in that with your experiences and your respective books. So it's been a pleasure interviewing you both. So thank you, Tony and Elena.